The golden chandeliers glowed above the banquet hall, casting a warm light over polished glasses and white tablecloths. I walked through the doors of the Milwaukee Country Club, where my parents' 50th wedding anniversary was being celebrated. Everyone seemed to know exactly where to stand, whom to greet, how to laugh at the right moment. I carried my modest clutch close to my side, feeling the weight of being the youngest in a family that never quite let me forget it. The scent of roast chicken and fresh rolls filled the air. Relatives bustled about in shimmering dresses and dark suits, their voices weaving into a noisy fabric of cheer. My sister Vespera already commanded the center of the room. She sparkled in a gown that seemed chosen to blind others into admiration. Her laughter rang out with practiced ease as cousins and uncles circled around her. She thrived on being the star, while I slipped in unnoticed. Families are like fudge. Mostly sweet with a few nuts, I reminded myself, hearing the quote in my head. Tonight, though, I felt like the nut they had cracked too often. A hostess led me to my seat. I followed quietly, already bracing for what I knew was coming. At the long banquet table draped with gold trim, my name card sat near the far end, close to the exit door, away from the spotlight. The same game, repeated year after year. I looked down the stretch of polished wood. My parents sat in the middle with Vespera right beside them. The honor seat, always hers. I caught the glance of a cousin who gave me a sympathetic smile, the kind reserved for children too small to protest. Another shrugged as though saying, "That's just how it is." I pulled out my chair and sat. A deep breath steadied me. My frustration pushed against my ribs, but I swallowed it, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crack. Silence, I told myself, can be sharper than any protest. As the meal began, I watched. Uncle Henry delivered his tired jokes, making the table roar. Two cousins leaned in, gossiping about promotions and houses. Their conversations gravitated to Vespera. "Of course she's here," one cousin said with admiration. "She never misses a milestone." The comment stung more than intended, for the implication was that my presence barely registered. I chewed slowly. Invisible, but observant. Being the youngest always meant being overlooked. I told myself I was used to it, though the ache in my chest betrayed me. Halfway through dinner, I slipped into the kitchen to offer help, hoping action might ground me. I carried a stack of plates toward the counter, only to find Vespera there, sipping her wine with a smile that seemed painted on. "Well, Artis," she said lightly, though her eyes carried steel, "just don't embarrass us tonight, okay?" The words landed like a slap, quiet, precise, designed to bruise without leaving a mark. Her lips curved sweetly for the others in the room, but the venom was for me alone. I paused, gripping the plate tighter. "Enjoying yourself?" I asked calmly, refusing to give her more than that. "Of course," she replied, tilting her glass so the light caught the crystal. "Some of us know how to handle evenings like this." I set the plates down gently, forcing composure. Inside, anger twisted with determination. If she wanted to ruin me, she would have to try harder. Returning to the table, I let memories wash through me. Times when she had stolen credit for my ideas at school. The graduation dinner where my parents toasted her, forgetting my scholarship letter sitting in my purse. The pattern was clear. It had never been about this evening. This was a lifetime of being overshadowed. Dr. Phil's words came to mind. "You teach people how to treat you by what you allow." I had allowed too much, too long, that would end here. As dessert was served, I sat straighter. I observed body language, each subtle smirk, each side glance. I began taking mental notes, not as a victim, but as a strategist. The key was to stay steady when they expected me to crumble. Across the hall, music played softly, violins dancing under the chatter. On the surface, it was a celebration, but beneath, tension hummed. I lifted my glass, sitting at the edge of the hall, watching Vespera bask in her spotlight. She raised her wine high, her smile sharp, gleaming like a blade hidden in silk. "Tonight," I whispered to myself, "I'll finally see what lies beneath that smile." I returned from the kitchen with my shoulders squared, refusing to let Vespera's hushed jab cling to me. The banquet hall was alive with a renewed buzz, laughter echoing off the high ceilings as waiters glided between tables with trays of food and wine. The music from the string quartet at the corner rose above the chatter, elegant yet faint, like background noise in a movie I didn't belong to. Eyes drifted toward me as I slipped back into my seat at the far end. No one spoke, but their glances lingered long enough to remind me that I didn't quite fit into the family tableau they adored. My cousin Melissa offered a polite nod before turning back toward the main table where Vespera reigned, glittering and confident. The glow from the chandeliers made everything shine: silverware, crystal glasses, even the fake smiles plastered across certain faces. I felt myself shrinking into the shadows, but inside, I steeled myself. Comparison is the thief of joy, I remembered Roosevelt's words, and though I knew them to be true, tonight comparison wasn't just a thief, it was a weapon sharpened by my own kin. "Vespera, you look stunning tonight," Aunt Jean's voice carried across the table. "That dress must be couture." Heads turned toward her, admiration pooling in their gazes. Vespera leaned back, letting the light catch on her sequined gown. She brushed her hair off her shoulder with practiced grace. "Thank you," she said warmly. "It's from a designer in New York." I kept my eyes on my plate until I heard a different voice slide in closer. My cousin Ione, ever loyal to Vespera. She leaned across me, pretending to admire my dress, her words dripping sugar laced with acid. "At least you tried," she said, her eyes scanning the soft blue fabric I'd chosen. "That color, well, brave choice." A small laugh rippled around the table, too soft to be overt mockery, but sharp enough to cut deep. My mother's lips pressed together into a strained smile. She didn't step in, didn't redirect, just let the comment hang there like smoke. I forced my lips into something resembling composure. My tongue ached to fire back, but I stayed still, choosing silence as my shield. Inside, though, I knew what it was: a branding, a reminder that no matter what I wore, I would never be seen as polished, not when Vespera was beside me. The laughter subsided, but echoes clung to me like static. Children at the other end, too young to know cruelty but old enough to mimic, whispered, "At least you tried." They giggled, their little voices repeating the insult until it became a chant inside my head. I gripped my fork, hovering it above my plate, motionless, invisible, yet somehow under a spotlight at the same time. The silence around me screamed louder than the conversations humming down the table. I sipped my water slowly, letting it ground me. The cold slid down my throat, anchoring me to this moment. When I looked up, I caught Vespera's smirk. Small, satisfied, the look of someone who knew her dominance would not be questioned. The clinking of glasses rose above the chatter. My father stood, lifting his wine with a proud, booming voice. "I just want to say how proud I am of my family tonight, especially of our eldest, Vespera. She's built a name for herself in New York law, standing tall in the toughest city in the world. We couldn't be prouder." Applause thundered across the room. My chest tightened. I braced myself, praying silently that the toast would end there. But it didn't. "And," he added, his eyes sweeping the table until they landed on me, "we only hope Artis can find her footing, just like her sister has." The words fell like lead, crashing onto the tablecloth. My hands went numb, my fork slipping slightly. Conversations stuttered into murmurs, gasps, then silence. Vespera's smile widened as she accepted the praise, her glass raised high. My face burned. Shame licked at my skin, threatening to break me open, but I swallowed it down, fighting the urge to defend myself, to shout across the table that I wasn't lost, that I had my own victories, even if they were invisible to them. I scanned the faces around me. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. Others nodded in quiet agreement. And I realized then, this was rehearsed. A family script played out over decades. My role had been cast long ago. But I wasn't going to read the same lines anymore. I won't let their narrative become my truth. Instead of breaking, I studied them. Every reaction, every whisper, every sip of wine covering discomfort. Each was a piece of evidence. If I stayed silent now, it wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The dinner marched forward. Plates clinked. Voices rose again. But I was no longer just enduring. I was cataloging each slight, filing them away like arrows in a quiver. Vespera poured herself more wine, casually refilling others' glasses with the authority of someone running the show. She moved easily, seamlessly, as if she owned not just the seat of honor, but the whole evening. My eyes narrowed as I noticed how carefully she handled the drinks, always deliberate, always watchful when her glass met mine. A suspicion began to grow inside me, subtle at first, but strong enough to keep my hand away from the untouched glass in front of me. If they wanted to call me too sensitive, then tonight I would let them, but I would also prove them wrong. I kept my gaze steady on that glass, unease gnawing at me, already sensing that what came next would cut deeper than words ever could. I sat still, my fork untouched, while the conversations around me swelled louder and brighter. The chandelier above shimmered with golden light, and I fixed my gaze on it as though I could anchor myself there, away from the sting of what had just unfolded. My cousin's whisper, the children's mocking repetition, my father's toast, it all pressed down on me like a heavy quilt I couldn't throw off. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, filling glasses and clearing plates, while my place at the edge felt colder, as if I'd been cut off from the warmth at the center. I reminded myself, composure is not surrender. Eleanor Roosevelt's words came to mind. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. If I gave in to the anger bubbling in my chest, I would only feed their story. So I lifted my chin slightly, breathed deeply, and stayed silent, even as humiliation simmered beneath my skin. When I glanced back at the table, I noticed something unsettling. The name cards near me weren't aligned properly, their angles shifted just enough to catch my eye. A memory stirred. I had seen my place card closer to the middle earlier when I checked the seating chart. Now here it was, tucked away at the very edge near the exit. It wasn't random. I didn't need proof to know who had done it. My eyes traveled down the length of the table, past the glittering cutlery and gleaming glasses, to the middle where Vespera sat laughing, surrounded by admirers. She basked in the glow of proximity to our parents, in the advantage of being framed as the family's crown jewel. Aunt Jean leaned in toward her, clapping her hand. "You always bring such life to these dinners, Vess," she said warmly. Vespera tilted her head, smiling modestly, though her eyes flickered toward me with something sharper. This wasn't an accident. It was engineered to push me into the shadows, to remind me that my presence was optional. I pressed my napkin against my lap, gripping the cloth until my knuckles stiffened. Swallowing my anger, I lowered my gaze, choosing not to show her what I felt. But memories began to surface uninvited, as if the name card had unlocked them. I remembered school award ceremonies where my name was announced softly, while Vespera's was celebrated with speeches and clapping. Holidays when gifts meant for me somehow ended in her hands because she'd make better use of them. Each memory echoed with the same thread. She orchestrated attention like a conductor, and I was always the afterthought. The sharpest memory struck, my junior year of high school. I had confronted my parents after another dinner where Vespera stole the spotlight. "Why don't you defend me?" I asked, voice breaking. "You're just more sensitive than others," my father replied, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. That phrase had haunted me for years. Sensitive. As if my perception of injustice was nothing more than fragility, as if pain felt in silence was my own fault. I drew in a long breath, pressing the napkin harder against my lap. Tonight, I would not let that label cage me. The sound of glass clinking pulled me from my thoughts. My father stood again, raising his wine with the gravitas he reserved for important pronouncements. The room fell quiet. "I want to say another word of gratitude," he began, his voice firm and proud. "Our eldest, Vespera, continues to make us proud. Just last month, she won another case in New York. Truly, she is the pride of this family." Applause erupted around the hall. My stomach clenched, but I forced my lips into something resembling a smile. "And let's not forget," my mother added warmly, "she has always been destined for great things. From the time she was little, she was bound to shine." I lowered my gaze, not a word about me. Not a mention of the classroom where I spent long hours teaching children how to read, or the community programs I volunteered for. To them, none of it counted. To them, I remained a shadow. The applause stung worse than the words. I sat straighter, breathing in deeply, willing myself not to react. My silence wasn't weakness. If I erupted now, it would only confirm what they always said, that I was fragile, overreacting, too sensitive. I would not hand them that satisfaction. I let my eyes wander across the table like a strategist surveying a chessboard. Who smiled too brightly at Vespera's success? Who averted their eyes from me? Who shifted uncomfortably, knowing this was cruel, but too cowardly to intervene? The hierarchy was plain. Vespera sat at the top, my parents her loyal defenders. I was the scapegoat, the one they used to polish her shine. The sting of their favoritism cut deeper than any jab from my sister. Parents are supposed to be safe. Parents are supposed to be the shield. Instead, mine had always been the stage managers in Vespera's show. I thought of something Peggy O'Mara once said, "The way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice." My inner voice had long been telling me I was less than, invisible, unworthy of pride. But maybe tonight I could change that. The music swelled again as waiters wheeled out the cake, candles glowing. The laughter circled the room, but I could feel something heavier brewing under my ribs. A storm was gathering inside me, slow and relentless. Vespera managed her image with flawless precision, laughing at just the right pitch, sipping her wine like royalty, glancing at me now and then with a smirk that dared me to falter. She thought she owned the room. And maybe, until tonight, she did. I placed my hands firmly on the table, grounding myself. I would not confront her yet. I would observe, catalog every move, let her arrogance build the rope she would hang herself with. "You want me silent?" I whispered to myself. "Tonight, my silence will be my sharpest weapon." I watched my father pour another drink for Vespera, the liquid catching the light as laughter swirled around her. I sat still, my eyes fixed, the determination hardening inside me. If I was invisible tonight, it would be the last time. The echo of my parents' toast still weighed heavy in my chest. I remained seated, my posture straight, but inside I was fighting the ache of their words. Around me, the banquet pressed forward as though nothing had happened. Conversations swelled, glasses clinked, and the scent of roasted chicken and buttery rolls mixed with the sharpness of red wine. No one looked my way. I might as well have been invisible. I gripped the stem of my water glass, my fingers stiff. Across the table, Vespera's voice rang above the hum like a practiced melody. Every time she laughed, the table seemed to tilt in her favor. I noticed Ione leaning toward her, whispering something, both of them stealing quick glances in my direction. Their exchange was subtle, yet sharp enough to cut. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the strategy before a move, I reminded myself. I stayed still, though my heart pressed hard against my ribs. The waiter approached with a tray of glasses, their rims gleaming under the chandelier. Before he could set them down, Vespera intercepted with a graceful lift of her hand. "Let me take care of this," she said, her tone coated with charm. She picked up one of the glasses and turned toward me. "Only the best for my baby sister," she said, her smile warm enough to fool the room, but too polished, too deliberate. The stem trembled in my hand as I accepted it. I swirled the liquid, watching how it clung to the glass. Lifting it close, I caught the faintest undertone. Not the crisp scent of wine, but something bitter, a hint that didn't belong. Memories flickered. Other nights when drinks tasted strange, times when sleep came too heavily, mornings when I felt groggy though I'd barely sipped. My suspicion hardened, but I kept my face calm, hiding behind a polite smile. "Thank you," I said softly, setting the glass down without lifting it to my lips. Around me, relatives lifted their glasses. "To 50 years!" my uncle boomed. Laughter and cheer cascaded through the room, and glasses clinked in unison. I felt eyes on me, waiting, expecting me to join the ritual. At the far side of the table, the children mimicked Vespera, raising invisible glasses, giggling. The family played their roles well, the entire scene unfolding like a performance choreographed by her. I sat perfectly still, cataloging every smirk, every glance, every false note in the song of this evening. Patience is power, I reminded myself. Then Vespera rose slightly, lifting her glass high. "One drink won't kill you, Artis," she said, her voice lilting with just enough playfulness to mask the edge. "Come on, toast with me." The table erupted, voices urging, laughter pushing me into the spotlight. "Yes, join us. Don't be shy." The sound pressed down on me, suffocating. My fingers tightened around the stem. I hesitated long enough for the moment to sting, then lifted the glass halfway. My lips barely touched the surface as I let a small sip pass. The sweetness hit first, but beneath it, a faint bitterness curled on my tongue. My stomach knotted. I turned my eyes toward Vespera. She smirked, watching me carefully, as though measuring how much I could take. I set the glass down slowly, deliberately, making sure my hand didn't tremble. My body wanted to recoil, but I kept my movement steady. If I let her think she's winning, she'll reveal more, I thought. The table roared with conversation again. I pushed my plate closer, nudging food around to create a shield. Anyone glancing my way would see a woman simply enjoying her dinner. They wouldn't know I was counting breaths, keeping my body language tight. Vespera leaned back in her chair, satisfied, pouring more wine into her glass with exaggerated ease. Yoni clapped her hands at the cheer, her laugh carrying further than it needed to. The performance was nearly flawless. The music from the quartet swelled, strings bending the air, but all I heard was my own heartbeat thudding like a drum. My eyes stayed fixed, watching, analyzing every move. The night teetered on the edge of civility, each laugh a crack in the facade. I kept my voice inside, whispering to myself, if they think I'm too sensitive, let them. They'll see soon enough that silence is not surrender, it's preparation. I raised my gaze to meet Vespera's across the table. Her triumphant smirk glittered under the lights, her glass raised again. The bitter taste still lingered on my tongue, a reminder that this toast was never meant to celebrate. It was meant to test. This toast will not be my undoing, I vowed quietly in my mind. It will be hers. I set my glass back down after the forced toast, fingers tightening around the stem longer than necessary, as if holding on to balance itself. A strange warmth crawled through me, slow at first, but undeniable. The chandelier above flickered in my vision, as though its light had suddenly grown too bright. I inhaled deeply, forcing myself to slow my breath, reminding myself not to panic. Around me, the hall buzzed with the same careless laughter. Relatives leaned toward one another, passing dishes, pouring wine, speaking of vacations and business deals. None of them noticed me stiffening. None of them cared that the air felt heavier in my chest. Vespera reclined in her chair, her voice floating above the chatter, animated, perfectly timed. She didn't look at me directly, not in the way others would notice, but I caught the sidelong glances, her eyes flicking just long enough to confirm she saw me fighting to stay composed. This isn't my imagination anymore, I whispered to myself, swallowing hard. Something is wrong. The edges of the room blurred. I gripped the table, steadying my body against the wave pressing in on me. My fork trembled when I tried to lift it, clattering faintly against the porcelain. A cousin noticed, laughing lightly, his voice carrying farther than he realized. Don't tell me one sip got you tipsy, Artis, he teased, and the table chuckled with him. Heat flared in my cheeks, not from drink, but from humiliation. The laughter rippled through the hall like water over broken glass. I clenched my jaw, forcing the dizziness down, swallowing it as though I could trap it inside. I would not collapse. Not here, not for her. I began to count my breaths, silently, one by one. Each inhale measured, each exhale controlled. My hands pushed food around on my plate, feigning interest, giving the illusion of normalcy. My eyes flicked toward Vespera. She raised her brows, smirking faintly, enjoying the show. I will not give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall, I vowed. Across the table, Thora, my aunt, my only quiet ally, watched me with furrowed brows. Her lips pressed thin, but she said nothing, her gaze steady, as though anchoring me from afar. That silent support wrapped around me like a thin rope in a storm. Then, suddenly, Vespera leaned closer, her perfume sharp in the air, her manicured hand pressed down on my shoulder. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice dripping with sweetness that fooled everyone else. "Maybe sit this one out. You're always so delicate." The chuckles returned, gentle, indulgent, as though she were the protective sister. But I knew better. The weight of her grip wasn't comfort. It was control, a warning pressed into my skin. I forced a smile, though my body screamed against it. "I'll be fine, thanks," I replied evenly. Her eyes narrowed a fraction, the smirk faltering before she pulled back, resuming her role as the charming star. To anyone else, it looked like she was caring. To me, it was confirmation that she knew exactly what she had done. I replayed the evening in my mind. The seat card shifted, the comparisons, the bitter sip, and now this dizziness clawing through me. It was too precise, too layered to be chance. This isn't just favoritism. This is sabotage. For years, I had endured being overshadowed, being overlooked. But this was different. This was deliberate harm disguised as family ritual. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I pressed those words into my heart like a brand. I would not let her rewrite the story again. Tonight, I would start collecting everything. Every word, every gesture, every poisoned smile. The banquet noise continued, but it had dulled for me. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart, steady like a warning drum. I lifted my water glass, sipping to clear the bitterness from my mouth, hiding my unease behind small talk with the cousin beside me. Thora's eyes met mine again, a silent message passing between us. I wasn't entirely alone, and that flicker of solidarity steadied me more than the water did. I knew, with sudden clarity, that the night would not stop here. Vespera wasn't finished, and if I stumbled again, it wouldn't be because I was weak. It would be because I was preparing, planning my next step. I gripped the edge of my chair, feeling the dizziness pulse through my veins, yet keeping my face still, composed. Across the table, Vespera lifted her glass once more, her smirk returned, sharp and mocking. "She thinks I'm falling apart," I whispered inside my chest. "She has no idea what's coming." I sat perfectly still, forcing my body into control after the wave of dizziness had passed. The hall sparkled with laughter, clinking glasses, the polished hum of a celebration that should have felt joyful. To me, each sound was sharpened, like the edge of a knife scraping across glass. My senses were raw, attuned to every whisper, every glance that skimmed my direction. I knew they were waiting for me to stumble again, waiting for the spectacle my sister wanted me to become. When people laugh together, it can heal, or it can wound, I thought. Tonight, it was the latter. I pressed my hand discreetly against the edge of the table, feeling the cool wood ground me. I would not falter, not again. But something in the air told me Vespera wasn't finished. She was circling for her next strike. "See?" Vespera's voice rang suddenly, her tone light but loud enough to command attention. "Artis is too sensitive as always. One sip and she looks ready to faint." The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. The table broke into laughter, a chorus of voices that blended into one sound designed to humiliate. I felt my face burn, my chest tighten, every muscle in my body stiffen. Ione laughed the loudest, tossing her head back as though Vespera had delivered the joke of the night. The relatives leaned into the humor, clapping the table, shaking their heads with indulgent smiles. My parents exchanged a look, one of weary resignation. They did not speak, did not defend me. That silence confirmed what I had long suspected. They aligned with her version of me, fragile and exaggerated, rather than the truth. They laugh because they think I'm powerless, I told myself, pressing my lips into a thin line. They'll regret underestimating me. The laughter did not fade quickly. It lingered, circling the table like smoke. A cousin whispered to another, "She's always been like that." The agreement rolled quietly, but the words cut more deeply than the laughter itself. I sat still, my breaths measured, my hand trembling under the table where no one could see. It wasn't strangers wounding me tonight. It was blood. Their approval of her cruelty cloaked in amusement felt heavier than any insult. I thought of all the times gaslighting had been passed off as teasing. The jokes, the nudges, the laughter at my expense. They always carried the same refrain, "You're too sensitive," and in that repetition, they had built a version of me that wasn't mine. I held my breath as another blow landed, this time from a smaller voice. A young niece, emboldened by the adults, piped up, "Artis is just too sensitive." The room erupted again, laughter swelling louder, crueler now because it carried the innocence of a child repeating what had been normalized. I froze, my chest hollowing. Those words struck harder than the ones from grown mouths. When children repeat cruelty, it isn't only a jab, It's proof that it has seeped into the foundation of the family itself. Vespera leaned back, her face gleaming with satisfaction. She didn't have to say another word. The damage was already done. I forced myself not to break, not to cry. My silence became armor, hardening over every wound. If they expected me to collapse beneath their ridicule, they would leave disappointed. Inside, something shifted. A new strength began to take root in the soil of my humiliation. If they want me to break tonight, they will fail. My silence will not be weakness. My eyes lifted across the table and met Thora's. Her gaze was steady, sympathetic, and unyielding. She didn't laugh. She didn't look away. That simple connection became my anchor, reminding me that I was not completely alone. I straightened in my seat, shoulders back, eyes dry. Each insult, each laugh was no longer just pain, it was evidence. Each chuckle was another brick in the case I was building silently. Resilience doesn't always roar, I reminded myself. Sometimes it's a steady breath in the middle of chaos. The night pressed on. Conversations shifted again. Plates were cleared, wine refilled, but the air was altered for me. I no longer felt like prey. Instead, I felt like a hunter waiting, quiet, patient, biding time for the perfect strike. I rehearsed in my mind the ways I could expose her, the way her words slipped when she was overconfident, the way she watched me too closely, as though she feared I might finally speak. Vespera grew careless, mistaking my silence for defeat. Her laughter rose again, easy and unguarded, her confidence swelling with every minute I refused to react. They think I'm too sensitive, I reflected, resting my fingertips lightly on my glass of water. They'll learn I've just been too observant. The laughter eventually dulled, conversations flowing elsewhere, but the damage was sealed in place. I raised my water glass slowly, deliberately, and let my eyes lock on Vespera's across the table. Every cut leaves a scar, but scars can become weapons. The words, "too sensitive," still clanged inside my skull long after the laughter had ebbed into murmurs. They felt like knives, tiny cuts that left invisible scars. I tried to sit upright, tried to steady my breath, tried to remind myself that composure was strength, but my body betrayed me. A heaviness spread through my limbs, and the air thickened until I struggled to draw it in. The chandelier fractured in my vision, its golden light splitting into blurred halos. I blinked rapidly, forcing my focus back to the table, back to the food in front of me, but the blur expanded. I clutched the edge of the table with one hand, nails biting into the wood. They don't see the truth. They only see a show, I thought, anger mixing with despair. I pushed back my chair, meaning to stand, to breathe, but my knees wavered, and the strength drained out. My shoulder clipped the edge of the table, and suddenly the glass before me tipped. It tumbled with slow precision before crashing sideways, red wine spilling across the perfect white tablecloth. The liquid bled outward, spreading like an accusation no one wanted to acknowledge. The room went silent for one heartbeat. Then, like a dam breaking, laughter erupted. "There she goes again!" someone jeered, and the chorus followed. Heat flooded my face, burning up my neck, and humiliation surged in waves. I clenched my fists tight in my lap where no one could see, refusing to wipe at my face, refusing to let them glimpse any tears. Ione leaned toward another cousin, her lips curled in a smug smile. "One sip, that's all it takes for her," she said, just loud enough for me to hear. "Pathetic," a younger cousin muttered, shaking his head. Around the table, chairs shifted back, bodies leaned away as though I were something contagious. My parents avoided my eyes, their heads tilting just slightly in disappointment. The sting was worse than the laughter. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was an embarrassment to endure. I sat frozen, prey displayed in the open, but deep inside, something hardened. "This shame won't define me," I told myself, gripping the fabric of my dress. "This is fuel." An aunt, sitting 2 seats down from Vespera, reached over and patted her hand. "She always looks after artists, poor thing," she said warmly, smiling as though this were an act of generosity. Others nodded, murmuring agreement. Vespera pressed her hand against her chest, tilting her head in mock concern. "I just worry about her health," she said sweetly. "She's always been so delicate." The hypocrisy cut deeper than the laughter. My humiliation was being repackaged as her virtue, her cruelty rewarded as compassion. The family didn't see her hand pressing into my shoulder earlier, or the smirk that followed. They saw what she wanted them to see, the loyal, protective sister. My stomach twisted, betrayal crawling up like bile. It wasn't just her. It was all of them. An entire system that rewarded the one who tore me down. I said nothing. I made no move to defend myself. Instead, I took mental notes, cataloging every nod, every indulgent smile, every instance where silence protected her. This wasn't only humiliation anymore. This was evidence. The dizziness still pulsed faintly, but I steadied myself with slow breaths until the fog lifted. I straightened in my chair, pressing both palms to the table until my arms felt strong again. Slowly, I sat back upright. Vespera expected me to excuse myself, to retreat to the restroom, to disappear and confirm their narrative. But I didn't move. I lifted my head, looked directly across the table, and met her eyes. Her smile faltered for a split second. She wasn't expecting resistance. If you want me erased, I thought, holding her gaze, I will make sure the world remembers this night instead. Across the room, Thora caught my eye. Her expression was calm but firm, her presence anchoring me. That steady gaze reminded me I was not as alone as they wanted me to feel. I pressed my hand lightly against my water glass and raised it, not to drink, but to reclaim composure. My grip tightened on the cool glass as I stared at the spreading wine stain on the tablecloth. The red seeped outward, blotting the pristine white like a wound no one could stop. Vespera smirked again, mistaking my silence for surrender. She leaned back, basking in the laughter that had left me scorched. But inside me, silence had transformed. It was no longer passive endurance, it was an active choice, a calculated plan forming out of ashes. Every move you make tonight, Vespera, I will use against you. I stared down at the tablecloth, the stain growing darker, deeper, and whispered silently, "This stain won't fade. But neither will my memory of tonight." The stain on the tablecloth spread like a wound no one wanted to acknowledge. I steadied my breath, refusing to let the collapse push me away from the table. The laughter had quieted, but whispers still hung in the air, darting back and forth like gnats. Their murmurs weren't loud enough to be understood, yet sharp enough that I felt them slicing at my back. Vespera tilted her head, feigning pity. "She just can't handle much," she told a cousin across from her, voice pitched so it floated toward me as if carried by the air. The cousin nodded sympathetically, smiling at her like she was the dutiful older sister, endlessly patient with her fragile sibling. I bit down on my own tongue, refusing to flinch. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I remembered Maya Angelou's words. And Vespera had shown me enough. I reached for my napkin, pressing it against my lap to anchor myself. When I looked back up, I caught it. A flash of silver, quick, sharp. Vespera, sliding something into her clutch. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. But then the glimmer caught the chandelier's light again, unmistakable. A blister pack, half empty, silver foil catching and holding the glow. My eyes snapped to hers. For one suspended second, we locked gazes. Her lips curved in the faintest smirk, a flicker of triumph crossing her face before she masked it with laughter, joining a story an uncle told at the far end of the table. The act was seamless, but I knew what I had seen. My chest chilled. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was proof. She isn't careless, I thought, shivering as I set my fork down. She's confident I can't prove it. Not yet. Around me, relatives kept up their conversations, careers, vacations, the price of property on the east side. Their voices blurred into meaningless chatter. Every detail sharpened for me. Every laugh became a blade. Ione leaned toward her, whispering quickly, and they shared a glance that cut like a thread pulled tight. My anger surged, rising hot in my throat, but I masked it behind a calm expression, detached, almost bored. Silence unsettles manipulators more than words. I saw it happen. Vespera shifted slightly, restless under the weight of my quiet stare. Then something shifted at the corner of my vision. Thora. She sat diagonally across, her face calm, her presence quiet as always. But this time, her eyes met mine directly. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she tilted her head toward Vespera's clutch. I blinked, my breath caught. She had seen it too. Her lips pressed tight, but she gave the faintest nod, her chin lowering in silent confirmation. My pulse kicked. Relief surged through me like oxygen filling lungs starved of air. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't fighting shadows alone. A witness. I pressed my water glass to my lips, disguising the tremor of my hand. I let the cold water steady me as I breathed in. I'm not alone, and that changes everything. For weeks, maybe years, I had felt like a single voice drowned by laughter, erased by their approval of her. Now, at this table, beneath the glow of chandeliers and the scrape of cutlery, I had someone who saw, someone who believed. With that signal, something inside me shifted. I stopped merely surviving and began strategizing. Every slight became a data point. Every chuckle was logged. Every gesture of hers folded into the case I was building silently in my head. I wouldn't confront her directly tonight. No, I would wait for the stage to rise high enough that when she fell, there would be no one left to catch her. I replayed each moment, her hand pouring my drink, the bitter taste on my tongue, the laughter when I stumbled, her feigned concern, and now, those pills, hidden but not hidden enough. She was writing her own ending. All I had to do was let her ink dry. The banquet swelled again, music rising from the quartet in the corner, laughter scattering across the room. Silverware chimed, glasses clinked. On the surface, everything gleamed. But beneath, I felt the storm hum, a vibration only I seemed to sense. I lifted my glass of water slowly, deliberately, choosing calm over collapse, control over chaos. Across the table, Vespera smirked, convinced she owned the night, convinced she still controlled the narrative. But I knew better now. Tonight, she had already revealed too much. I locked eyes with Thora once more, sealing our silent pact across the room. If she thinks I'll stay silent forever, she's already lost. The hall had returned to its rhythm, but it no longer felt like music to me. The clinking of forks and knives, the hum of laughter, the shuffle of waiters, it all blurred into background noise against the roar of my own pulse. I sat straighter than before, calmer than they expected, and in that calm, I felt something shift. I was no longer prey. Across the table, Vespera's eyes flicked toward me again, expecting to find my tears, my embarrassment. Instead, I kept my expression unreadable, hands folded in my lap. My silence unsettled her more than any outburst could have. If she thinks humiliation broke me, she'll regret assuming, I thought, watching her sip her wine with practiced grace. I reached for my phone, meaning to distract myself, perhaps send a text to Thora to reassure her I was still standing strong. But when my fingers curled around the device on my lap, my heart lurched. It was heavier than it should be. The case wasn't mine. I slid it into my palm discreetly, lowering it under the edge of the tablecloth. Turning it over, I saw the initials etched faintly in the corner of the case. V.M. Vespera Mitchell. My breath caught. In the chaos of the wine spill, our phones must have switched. My chest tightened, adrenaline surging. If this is hers, then tonight she handed me her weapon. I glanced down the table. Vespera was laughing at something Uncle Henry said, but her hand drifted unconsciously toward her clutch, fingers brushing the flap, checking for what wasn't there. She frowned, subtle but sharp, then smoothed it over with a smile. The device in my hands felt like a ticking bomb, heavy with secrets. I debated, pulse pounding. Opening it here would be dangerous. If she noticed, if anyone saw, it could ruin everything. But what if inside were messages, pictures, something undeniable? This phone could hold the proof I needed, more damning than any smirk or staged concern. I swallowed hard, remembering Roosevelt's words. Courage is not having the strength to go on. It is going on when you don't have the strength. I closed my fingers tighter around the phone, resolve sharpening. Not yet. Timing mattered more than anything. Just then, I felt a brush against my wrist. Thora's hand, discreetly slipping a folded napkin beneath the edge of the table. I unfolded it in my lap with trembling fingers. Inside, scrawled quickly in her neat hand, I photographed her slipping something in your glass. My lungs expanded in relief. For the first time all night, the weight in my chest eased. It wasn't just my word anymore. Someone else had seen. Someone else had captured it. I folded the napkin tight, sliding it back under the tablecloth, my face neutral as ever. My mind whispered, 2 pieces of proof, one night, the tides are shifting. I studied Vespera then, really studied her. Her mask of confidence wavered at the edges. I noticed Ione's darting glances, the nervous shifting in her seat. The alliances that once felt impenetrable now showed cracks. Each insult they'd thrown at me tonight no longer stung the same way. They stacked like evidence, like bricks building a wall that would soon corner her. I sat still, watching, waiting. The strength I felt wasn't from confrontation, but from patience, from knowing the truth would land heavier if I let it ripen. The room shifted toward the main event. Waiters rolled in the cake, candles glowing, and my father began to rise for another speech. Glasses lifted again, laughter swelling as though nothing had changed. But beneath the table, I clutched Vespera's phone in one hand and Thora's note in the other. My arsenal. My rope. Vespera raised her glass, her smirk returning, secure in her illusion of control. You gave me the rope, I whispered to myself. Now watch how you hang yourself with it. The suspense thickened, the stage set for what had to come next. I pressed the phone flat against my palm under the table and lifted my eyes to hers, holding her gaze across the length of silver and crystal. She smiled, but for the first time, I saw the faintest crack in her performance. You think this banquet belongs to you? Wait until I stand. The waiters wheeled in the towering anniversary cake, covered in delicate white icing and lit with 50 flickering candles. All eyes turned toward the center of the hall, the chatter rising in anticipation. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. My hands, hidden under the table, clutched the phone and Thora's note, each pressing into my palm like a reminder of the truth I now carried. I scanned the faces around the table. They glowed with celebration, oblivious to the venom that had already seeped into the evening. My parents sat straight-backed, their pride radiating toward Vespera, as though she alone had given them cause to celebrate. Around her, the room hummed with compliments and adoration. She basked in it, confident again, her laughter swelling above the rest. They think tonight is her victory lap, I whispered to myself. They don't know it's her downfall. The candles flared as the lights dimmed, everyone rising to honor my parents. Glasses lifted, smiles wide, but I felt the beat of my heart grow stronger, louder, matching the pulse of inevitability. And then it happened. Ione, flushed from too much wine, leaned closer to Vespera with a laugh that rang too loud for the moment. Her voice carried over the table like a slip of a knife. Did you bring the meds like last time? The words froze the air. A ripple of silence fell before some relatives forced a chuckle, pretending they didn't understand, eager to dismiss what they had heard. But I had heard it, and so had everyone else. Vespera shot Ione a look so sharp it could cut glass. Her lips pressed tight, her eyes burning a warning meant to silence the slip. But the damage was done. I fixed my gaze on both of them, my chest tightening, my mind clear. Her allies are cracks in her armor. Tonight they'll break it open. I pushed back my chair slowly, letting the sound echo in the hushed hall. All eyes turned toward me, surprised that after so much humiliation I would dare stand. Glass in hand, I raised it, but not for a toast. My voice was calm, steady. You've all called me too sensitive, I began, the words deliberate, each one cutting through the quiet. Tonight, let me show you what sensitive really means. Uneasy glances darted across the table. My parents stiffened. My cousins shifted. Even the children grew still. Vespera smirked, dismissing me with a small shake of her head, certain this was another emotional outburst. But my timing was precise. Thora's hand slipped toward me under the table, her phone in her palm. I took it, my fingers brushing hers in silent gratitude. I turned the screen toward the table, raising it high enough for those nearby to see. The video played in grainy clarity. Vespera, leaning over my glass, slipping something from her hand with casual precision. Gasps rippled through the hall, sharp and undeniable. The amusement on faces turned to horror. "This," I said, my voice steady, though my heart thundered, "is what you called sensitivity. This is sabotage." The hall erupted. Voices shouted, some in disbelief, others in outrage. My father's hand dropped, his glass clattering to the table. My mother's eyes widened, her lips trembling with words she couldn't speak. Vespera's mask cracked, her face paling, eyes darting in panic. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly, her composure collapsing. Ione stammered, her hands fluttering as though she could erase the words. "It was just a joke, just a joke." But no one laughed. The crowd turned, questions flying. "Is it true? How could you? She could have been hurt." The hierarchy shifted in that instant. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the truth-teller, the one who had endured their ridicule and now held the evidence in my hand. For the first time, I'm not invisible, I thought, standing taller as the wave of voices crashed around me. Vespera opened her mouth to retort, but the words stumbled, tripping over the weight of the video, the proof too heavy to fight. Some relatives whispered about the police, others about the family's name, their reputation, already stained. My parents sat in silence, the truth laid bare, their pride twisted into shame. I breathed evenly, not shouting, not shaking. My strength was in the calm delivery, in the way silence now served me rather than buried me. Benjamin Franklin's words rang in my mind. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Tonight, outrage finally rose from their side of the table, not mine. The storm had broken, and poetic justice unfolded in real time. Vespera lunged, trying to snatch the phone from my hand, but relatives intercepted her, their voices raised, their faces dark with betrayal. "She lost the moment she underestimated me," I whispered internally, my grip on the phone steady, the evidence blazing in the glow of the chandeliers. The room was chaos after the video played, after the truth was held up like a mirror no one could turn away from. Voices overlapped in disbelief and anger, forks clattered back onto plates, and chairs scraped as relatives half rose in shock. I stood in silence at the center of it all, the storm whirling around me, letting their noise wash over me like waves against a rock. My parents' faces were pale, their eyes darting between me and Vespera as if searching for a version of reality they could still accept. My mother's voice shook as she asked, "Vespera, what is this? Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Vespera raised her chin, her voice breaking in its effort to hold steady. "It was a misunderstanding. She's exaggerating again. You all know how Artis is, always twisting things, always dramatic." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For years, they believed her words over my silence. Tonight, they could only watch her unravel herself. Vespera's voice cracked as her excuses tumbled out faster than she could control. "It wasn't. Those weren't even pills, just vitamins. This is ridiculous." Ione leaned forward, trying to shield her with a trembling laugh. "She didn't mean anything by it. It was just a mistake." But no one was convinced. Murmurs swelled, angry, accusatory. "She could have killed her own sister," one uncle said, his voice low but cutting. The children stopped fidgeting, their wide eyes fixed on the adults for once in silence. The laughter that had mocked me all evening had finally stilled, and in its place was something sharper, heavier. My parents looked broken, caught between loyalty to their eldest and the undeniable evidence of betrayal. My father's mouth opened, then closed again, his words choking on the truth. Vespera's mask faltered. The polished composure that had dazzled them all night collapsed into anger. She turned her fury on me, her face twisted. "You've always been jealous, Artis. Always. You couldn't stand that I succeeded, that I was loved. This is your revenge." I didn't respond. My silence was more damning than any retort. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Uncle Henry, who rarely raised his voice for anything other than jokes, slammed his fist against the table. Plates rattled, wine glasses trembled. "This isn't jealousy," he thundered. "This is cruelty." Others joined in, voices rising in condemnation. "We trusted you." You crossed a line. How could you? Even the children, confused but perceptive, shrank back from her, sensing the tide had turned. My parents sat frozen, shame etched across their faces. Finally, my mother whispered, her voice thick with regret. We were wrong to ignore the signs. For the first time, I felt the family see me, not as the fragile scapegoat, not as the sensitive one, but as the truth they had refused to confront. Vindication surged, but so did grief. Despite the evidence, despite the tide turning, this wasn't triumph. It was loss. Years of betrayal and favoritism couldn't be undone in one night. Every slight, every laugh at my expense rose inside me like ghosts I couldn't banish. Justice feels cold when it's this late, I thought, pressing my hand against the back of a chair to steady myself. And yet, there was freedom. I no longer felt chained to their approval, no longer desperate for their validation. The cost was steep, but in losing them, I was gaining myself. I turned my gaze toward Thora, who had quietly stood behind me in solidarity. Her nod was small, her eyes firm. Silence can be power when timed right. I carried that truth in my chest. The relatives continued to swarm in noise, questions, arguments, but I withdrew internally, stepping back from their judgment as if it no longer had weight. I don't need their applause. I only need my own peace. In that moment, I imagined life beyond this toxic hierarchy. A life rebuilt not on their expectations but on my own terms. Peggy O'Mara's words echoed softly. Sometimes you don't get closure, you just move on. The banquet began to break apart. Conversations lowered to a dull hum, the cake untouched, its candles flickering pointlessly. Vespera slumped in her chair, stripped of her image, her allies scattered, her voice reduced to mutters no one believed. My parents avoided her gaze, shame too heavy to confront. The silence between them was louder than their words had ever been. I stepped back quietly, my presence now undeniable, stronger than I had ever been in their eyes. I knew then that the ties were broken, maybe forever. And I accepted it. I didn't win a family tonight. I won myself. I turned toward the exit, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The wine-stained table stretched behind me, red against white, a scar the banquet would carry long after the night ended. The banquet is over, I whispered inside myself. But my life is just beginning. The banquet hall had fallen into an eerie stillness. The cake, once meant to symbolize 50 years of love and unity, sat untouched at the center of the room, its candles flickering as if mocking the silence that replaced celebration. The laughter that had echoed all night was gone. Only scattered whispers remained, bitter and sharp. Vespera sat isolated at the table, her shoulders slumped, her head bowed low. For the first time, her carefully constructed armor was stripped away, leaving her small, cornered, and exposed. A few relatives gathered their coats, muttering about shame as they slipped out early, their disgust plain on their faces. Others lingered in uneasy silence, their eyes refusing to meet mine. I looked at the long, wine-stained cloth stretched across the table, the scar of the night's unraveling. This was never just about me, I thought. It was about ending her grip on all of us. Truth has a way of slicing deeper than cruelty ever could, and tonight it had cut through every illusion my sister had wrapped around herself and around this family. I stepped toward her, each footfall deliberate. The room followed me with their eyes, waiting, breath held, to see what would come next. When I reached her end of the table, I placed the phone and the folded napkin onto the linen in front of her. They lay there like a verdict no one could appeal. You tried to bury me with shame, I said, my voice calm, carrying across the hushed hall. Instead, you buried yourself. Vespera's lips curled back, her voice dropping into a whisper laced with venom. They'll forget. They always do. Time makes people look away. I leaned closer, my words steady. Not this time. I'll make sure of it. The shift in me was final. I was no longer the younger sister they could dismiss, no longer the shadow to her stage. I had stepped into my own light, and there was no turning back. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own phone. With a measured breath, I dialed. The sound of the digits felt like a hammer striking a nail, sealing the night into permanence. Yes, I said when the voice on the other end answered. I'd like to report an attempted poisoning. Gasps swept through the hall like a sudden wind. Chairs creaked as relatives leaned forward. Some clutched their mouths, others whispered furiously. The weight of what I'd done, the refusal to let this remain hidden in the cracks of family drama, settled into every corner of the room. This is a crime, I continued clearly, my voice never wavering. Not a misunderstanding, not a joke. The family's faces shifted in waves. Some looked at me with pride, others with fear, some with shame. A few whispered, "She's brave," while others hissed about disgrace. My parents sat like statues, their pride shattered, unable to defend her, unable to meet my eyes. Thora stood beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You did what needed to be done," she said softly, "for me alone to hear." I nodded once, the words settling like balm. I didn't crave their approval anymore. I didn't flinch at their blame. All I wanted was clarity, the kind that comes only when lies are burned away. "Sometimes you must tell the story of your scars," I said aloud, my gaze sweeping the room, "to stop others from getting the same wounds." The words hung in the air, undeniable. The police arrived quietly, their presence deliberate but discreet. They spoke to Vespera, their voices firm, their pens scratching against notepads. Her defiance cracked further, her protest dissolving into stammers. For the first time, she had no audience to shield her, no laughter to weaponize. I stepped back, taking a deep breath that filled my chest more fully than any I could remember. The weight of years, the insults, the comparisons, the humiliations, lifted piece by piece. I thought of every time I had been labeled too sensitive and how that same sensitivity had saved my life tonight. The hall itself felt smaller now, suffocating in its brokenness, but my world outside its doors felt larger, wider, and filled with possibility. They wanted me silent, I whispered inside myself. Instead, I chose my voice. When the officers escorted Vespera away, the room seemed to fold in on itself. Some wept, some argued, some stood in stony silence. My parents looked hollowed out, but I no longer searched their faces for recognition. That battle had ended. I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor, a rhythm steady and certain. The doors opened, and the cold Milwaukee night air wrapped around me. I breathed it in deeply, the sting of it clearing every last trace of the banquet's suffocating air. I didn't just end her hold, I thought, my breath curling into the night sky. I ended mine too. The stars above glittered like fragments of a new path, reminding me that renewal doesn't come in applause or apologies. It comes in walking away, in choosing peace over chaos. I no longer longed for my parents' approval. I no longer needed to prove my worth in their broken hierarchy. My victory was quiet but complete: vindication, independence, and peace. "Strong people stand up for themselves," I whispered, recalling a line I had once clung to, "but stronger people stand up for others." Tonight, I had done both. The banquet was their legacy. Tonight, I began my own.